some point, and once upon a time they used paper maps or paper data. Well, rule number one that they need to follow is to know your system. And so any action, if you think about it, any actions you take downstream of that can really be challenging if you don't know exactly what you're dealing with and knowing your system. So rule number one is to know your system. The second is to identify those threats, identify threats across the system. They have laid out, PHMSA came together to lay out 8 predominant threat categories. Then it directs the utilities, the LDCs, to rank those risks. So put together a risk ranking process. This you'll often see if you review these DIMPs, which are sometimes filed, rarely made public, and they frequently claim confidentiality on them. Step 4 is to mitigate those risks. And step 5, something we'll also be talking about, is continuous improvement. Right? You are not supposed to just do this once. You're supposed to go back, take a look. Are you running a strong distribution integrity management program, and how can you improve it? So it's not necessarily prescriptive. They don't specifically say this type of pipe is dangerous or this type of action needs to be taken within a defined period of time. They leave a lot of that up to the LDC. So this is the Distribution Integrity Management Program. It's the core of the pipeline safety requirements for all LDCs around the country. I'm going to use the term call to action. Call to action is not a pipeline, not a clearly defined program. It's not even in its own sense a clearly defined thing. We have this box on the right that says PHMSA urges states to fast track replacement of high risk pipes in 2011. Well, it was actually about a year's worth of different policy statements, different letters to different audiences that tends to get talked about under this broader umbrella of PHMSA's call to action. But those encouragements have the sort of common thread being encouraging states to adopt trackers, infrastructure trackers, accelerated cost recovery that would support the utilities speeding up their replacement of certain pipe materials, certain identified pipe materials that PHMSA determined to be high risk. But again, this is not a legal mandate. It is a sort of policy encouragement. A handful of letters never went through a process to be made into any sort of formal law. But a number of states had these infrastructure trackers prior to the call to action, but shortly after, within about 5 years, we had 43 states plus the District of Columbia creating infrastructure trackers, so accelerated cost recovery mechanisms that would essentially shorten the time window, created sort of annual programs by which utilities could accelerate cost recovery for certain types of pipe replacement actions. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Don't need to really go through this, but it's just a summary of the differences between the two. So one is a regulated, a mandated safety framework. The other is a voluntary federal campaign. So call to action, voluntary, DIMP, mandatory. DIMP, there's a very clear statement about that the utility should determine the risk on their own and determine the remediation method on their own timeline, whereas call to action really created pipe replacement as the default. They called for pipe replacement of an accelerated cost recovery as the default. So I'll pause on this slide because this is why we did this paper, right? If we were and this is why we're talking to you as the consumer advocates. So safety is a big reason, but also the cost impact of this type of program, and these two actions together. And you can see this pre-2011 period, very sort of slow growth rate in the cost of CapEx, running right around inflation numbers, 2.2% compound annual growth rate, and just the absolute takeoff from this 2011 period where you get DIMP and call to action coming together. It's been about $250 billion in distribution capital spending, about 33 billion a year on distribution capex today. That's up from about 7 billion around 2011. And our estimates, and we'll get into the detailed way we got to this, but about 75% of that capex is for pipe replacement, not new lines. And so while there has been some expansion around the country, about 75% of the dollar spend has been on pipe replacement, mains and services, since 2011. And so this is really what we're looking into with this study, with this analysis, is both, $250 billion is quite a big deal of money. But if it's really making the system safer, then that can be the price of safety. And so there is a challenge in that PHMSA has not done this analysis. We'll talk about it a little bit later. One of those House bills that's up for debate right now does call for this type of analysis. We don't know if that's going to make it into the final law, but it's really what we sought to do with this study, is to take a look back now that we have this 15 years of data to help answer this question. We want to know, is the system safer, and can those safety improvements be attributed to this increase in spending and the program changes by PHMSA? So that's really what our paper takes a look at. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions before I get into the meat. We're going to talk about the actual safety data, the DIMP framework, a lot of the spending as we get forward. But any questions before we start on DIMP or call to action?
No, I was just going to make a comment, Michael, and I'll keep it brief. I was down in New Mexico a month after this blew up with San Bruno, and one of the people who teaches the gas side, he's since retired, was the rate case team leader for PG&E, and he was starting to pull out what was left of his hair, that they wanted him to try to figure out how much money they needed to PG&E needed to put in, and I think it was 2 billion, 2.5 billion, something like that. And they were having, as you said, the very issues. They didn't even know where the facilities were on facility maps, things like that. And of course, question I kind of posed as being a former regulator was, even though depreciation is return of the investment, a lot of people are going to say, didn't you know this thing is getting pretty depreciated? What about the returns that the California Commission gave you, to allow you to go out and make new investments and profits, as well as they do a risk assessment model out there every 5 years. What'd you do on that? So yeah, your information is really on point from someone that kind of saw this process kind of, sitting in the bleachers.
Good to hear we're on point. Although one thing I'll say is I can guarantee you it's been a lot more than 2 billion spent to date.
Yes. Oh, yes. Very much so. Yes. But
Joe, got a question?
Yes, go ahead and answer your question, Mike, please.
Sorry, something's going on with my button. Mike, thanks for being here. We've been anticipating your paper. Thanks for team as well for all your hard work. I appreciate you joining us today and joining the presentation. Can you, if you have a quick second, give any context to, when the call to action came out, did the feds give, kind of guidance on, hey, here's where we think effective spending, should be targeted. This is what we think this call to action should look like. Was there any framework from the feds, or was this really kind of the approach to the call to action? Was this really utility designed? Where was the conversation or the broader framework around, hey, here's how you proceed?
I know the general shorter answer on this, which is a focus on quote unquote high risk materials, but Dory's on here, and as is Justin. And so Dory, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what the call to action language and
Let
those
me
statements
ask
were
Justin
about.
to do it, because Justin has really read everything from a legal standpoint and more. So Justin, do you mind chiming in on
Yeah,
this
sure.
point? I have some things to say, but I think you can say it.
Yep. I'll start us off. Good morning, everybody. I'm Justin Gunlock. I'm the general counsel here at FOHI. Uh, I also do research stuff, but I bring the lawyer. So yes, in answer to your question, I would say there were elements of what you could call a structure or a framework, but they did not really pertain to risk. They didn't pertain either to the assessment of risk or to suggestions about its management. And the most concrete framework that I have found in relation to what it is that PHMSA gave to the world, and as a result of the call to action, is a December 2011 white paper, which mostly had advice to states on how to accelerate cost recovery. So that was the most thoughtful document. It all pertained to, I don't want to say sidestepping rate cases. It pertained to process steps involved in facilitating replacement decisions. It didn't set out to govern those decisions. And in fact, there is another white paper that was issued in 2015 that gave greater treatment to that. I wouldn't even go so far as to call that the sort of framework you have in mind, but that's probably the closest. I can drop a couple of these links in the chat if that's helpful. But the core answer to your question, as I understand it, is that no, the call to action did not present itself as either a sort of rival or addition to the DIMP framework. Dory, I don't know if there's more that I left out of that.
All right. Well, then let's talk through that DIMP framework. So this is the foundation for each gas. This is called that minimum requirement that's required by PHMSA for all the gas LDCs. DIMP lays out 4 performance measures for its effectiveness in the creation of DIMP. Number 1 being reportable incidents, which they call the ultimate measure of performance and whether the system would be safer. Second is excavation damage. The third is gas leaks repaired. And the fourth is replacement of higher risk materials. We're going to get into each of those a little further. We put together in our study basically a 4-part test and analysis. So 1 is looking at the rationale. What's the logical relationship between the measure and the performance outcome that it's seeking to illuminate? 2 is the issues with application. And so what definitions, data sources, collection protocols have been used, have those methods and measures introduced any biases or left any gaps, distortions to resulting data sets. The third is how it's used. You can think about that, and more so by the operators, by the regulators. Where are we seeing this data show up or these measures show up? And fourth and finally is an assessment by us going through given the strengths and weaknesses of a performance measure, what does the evidence show about whether these safety interventions have produced observable improvements in distribution safety outcomes? So we are going to walk through each of those. Back to this. Here we go. So reportable incidents. Again, this is the so-called ultimate measure. The rationale's quite sound. We have nearly 4 decades of consistent data on this, mostly consistent data on this. There has been threshold changes. So What is considered an incident has changed several times throughout the decades. Um, but overall, there's PHMSA incident data is reported annually, and we can trace a lot of that back. And so about a year ago, we spent a lot of time merging and cleaning old PHMSA data sets, doing things that I wish they had done for us, but we had to set up and do. So every time there has been a change in those threshold measurements, PHMSA has sort of bucketed it in terms of 1986 to 2001, 2001 to 6, 6 to 9, 10 to present data sets, and we spent a lot of time bringing those things together. Let's see, I think we had, you can see on the right the reporting thresholds. One of the challenges with reportable incidents is just how few there are per year. And so it's about 63 incidents per year, and that's across the country. And so you can think about if you're using this as the ultimate measure, there's certainly data that you can and information you can glean from that data, but 63 incidents per year is it's not a large and robust data set. And so we have found, and we'll go through it a little bit, once you sort of double click on an incident, there's quite a bit of information that's reported. So there's quite a bit you can determine from the incidents once you get into the sort of sub-reporting data. But one of the things that we would get to in our recommendations, which we're not going to cover the full set of recommendations today, is PHMSA has been increasing the threshold for a reporting incident. And if you actually go to pre-1986, there was the reporting threshold was about $5,000 in damage. And today it's now 122,000. A lot of that's been inflation adjusted. But there's also been a few just generic there was a generic step up in 1986, I think from $5,000 to $50,000 in terms of the incident threshold. And we lost a lot of great data in terms of, what you can determine from pipeline safety when you're measuring several hundred incidents per year instead of 63. One of the reasons that's incredibly important is the difference between a very small incident and a very large incident can often be a fraction of an inch, time, any number of variables. So one of the real challenges with reportable incidents is just the lack of quantity of them reported. So the data frequently gets used. We're going to walk through some charts as to what they show, but again, no formal review has been conducted by PHMSA or Congress. PHMSA publishes summary trends. They make public incident data available. They will respond to legislative requests asking about the data, but they have done no formal analysis of intervention methodology from DIMP or a call to action. So without further ado, this is a look at incident data from 1986 to present. It's split out between serious and significant incidents. I'm going to give those definitions in a minute. Probably should have given them first, but serious and significant incidents. This is analysis. We've conducted analysis. We've also contracted. I don't know if any of you know Joel Anderson. He's got his firm Total Integrity Analytics. Joel did the analysis on the effectiveness of TIMP, the transmission and integrity management program. Joel's frequently used by the gas industry to conduct this type of analysis for them. So we wanted to work with who the industry is working with as well to basically double do and fact check our own work. So we commissioned a study of distribution incidents from Joel. And what I want to point out here is there's been a long run decline in gas incidents. And so the system is getting safer. It's gotten safer on average about 3 to 5% per year since 1986. That is statistically significant improvements in safety. But what both our analysis and Joel's analysis show is that there was and has been no sort of formal step change, no increase uh, in the rate of change post 2011. So that influx of spending, if measured against purely reportable incidents, has not led to any sort of acceleration in system safety compared to pre-2011. Uh, you really can't definitively make any statements other than there has been no statistical increase in the rate of change there. One way to help better understand that is to actually look at the incident data itself. And I think I mentioned before, double clicking on this and getting an understanding of what's being reported here. And so this is incident, when incidents are reported, they're incident reported by cause. And so this is a breakdown of incidents by cause from 2010 to 2024, all incidents together. And I'm just going to say anecdotally, if you're talking about pipe replacement program, or if you're talking about pipeline safety, you're frequently hearing about pipe replacement programs. You're hearing about leak-prone pipe. I think it was mentioned in the chat, there's not any cast iron left. You might be dealing with some bare steel in Colorado, but that's the thing you hear about frequently. Well, look at the very bottom of the list of incident causes is corrosion failure. Things like welds and joint failures also relatively low on the list. And you can see the top of this list is absolutely dominated by excavation damage. Excavation damage, by far the number one leading cause of incidents. Other outside force damage, for those who aren't aware, the number one cause of other outside force damage is a vehicle running into a meter that is outside of a building. So one other way to look at this is on this slide, we just pull it by mains, and you get a better understanding if we're just talking about mains and main replacement programs and gas main safety. This is a bit better of a clearer of a picture of what's causing incidents over the years. So this is the ultimate measure. This is breaking down the data on gas system incidents. The second measure that was listed by PHMSA and DIMP for determining system safety was excavation damage. And I think you just got a pretty good sense of why excavation damage was at least prioritized by PHMSA and in the creation of the Distribution Integrity Management Program. By far the number one cause of incidents consistently for decades. PHMSA made it a performance measure for two reasons. One being the frequency, but also that even a minor excavation damage, a hit that doesn't actually cause an incident, is worth tracking. So it could cause a problem later on. And so PHMSA wanted to make sure that we collect all this data. It requires LDCs to report all hits, even the most minor of hits, because that can become a different issue later on. But one of the major issues that we found with application is when they are looking to track performance. If you're looking at the damage, the number of incidents, you're looking at it per ticket issued. How many times there is a excavation request, and the challenge on those tickets is there's no universal definition of a ticket. Every state has its own dig laws, and so what counts as a ticket, the size, the scope, all of that is different state by state. So it really makes it difficult to do these national or state by state comparisons. And also the challenges in how they then subsequently count that damage. And so I'm going to walk through what the data actually shows, but again, you're dealing with a bit of a numerator denominator issue, which we'll see pop up again, which is how you're counting a ticket compared to whether you're determining there's been a hit on a ticket. And so we see PHMSA publishes, there's quite a bit of great detailed data at the state level, some heat maps, some operator level breakdowns. We actually think this is one of the areas where the data is well collected and made available for the general public. But when PHMSA tends to use it, they'll publish this is a typical sort of national map, which is lacking in analysis. They haven't really done this national analysis or region by region analysis, but they do make the data available whereby someone, i.e. us and or others, could go in and do some more localized analysis. And when we do that, we can see a few things. So one is actual, if this chart were to go back a little bit further, you would see that a lot of the reduction in safety incidents, a majority of this reduction in safety incidents have come from a reduction in excavation damage. We have seen significant improvement in the reduction of excavation damage over several decades. So I think the label's wrong here. We'll adjust that. It's not 2005 to 2024. But progress has stalled in recent years. But we think there's a lot of opportunity here, given the variation and the variance in the excavation damage rate that you can determine. So this is by region, and you can see that different regions of the country have more frequent or less frequent excavation damage. We're a bit concerned that hazardous leaks from excavation damage are increasing, but that there's significant opportunity to improve safety by focusing on this prevention as opposed to pipe failure, so that there's more juice to squeeze on excavation damage reduction. I see a hand raised from Amy, so I'll pause there.
Yeah, I for some reason am not seeing the slides. So is there a way that you could, is there a link to the paper or something? I'm just not seeing them. Like Mike, you're a handsome guy and I like seeing the speaker, but I am not seeing any slides. I don't know, it could be me. But I didn't know if there's
I think I can probably help from, so if you're seeing me on your screen, at the top of your Zoom screen, there should be a button that says meeting and or like presenters screen. So it almost looks like tabs above everybody's picture, above my picture at the top of the screen. And there might be a
Michael Bloomberg screen. Thank you. Fixed it. I appreciate it. That's
okay.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody.
We'll make sure you get a copy of some of these slides after as well. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. All right, let me. Sorry, were there any sort of key points on excavation damage? If we go all the way back, it's the number one cause of incidents. We have PHMSA collects relatively adequate data. There's a huge challenge, though, in doing cross comparisons because of no universal definition of a ticket. All those 811 programs are pretty much designed independently at the state level, so it makes it very difficult to compare. However, we can compare overall damage data and look at that from a regional basis. Corey.
Yeah, there, I lowered my hand. Yeah, you know, the outside force, you mentioned a vehicle hitting the meter. So that's been an issue in Colorado because we have a lot of, a number of coils, which stands for customer-owned yard lines. And as the name suggests, the utility doesn't own that yard line, also known as a service lateral. It's the customer. And so therefore, the meter's set out at the property's premises, right? And so they see, the utility sees upon that, Michael, to then say, well, this is a reason, because of this outside forces, this is a reason then to get rid of the customer-owned yard line, put in a new service lateral, by the way, put it in rate base, and then we'll put the meter at the house. And I've countered that by saying, why don't you just put bollards around it, you know, to prevent the vehicle, if that's your reason. So I just kind of mentioned that to give you some color to what actually happens and how and what the utilities will argue.
I appreciate that, Corey, because you did a step two that we rarely see happen around the country, which is someone just looks at the safety issue and nobody else comes back and says, well, why don't you just do this much simpler, cheaper alternative? So not going to well, actually, I can comment on the effectiveness of bollards. They're pretty effective at stopping a car. Um, but but yeah, it's a great example of a step that frequently doesn't happen. And with the sort of second half of this presentation is going to get into is some of the safety and the alternative methods for intervention. So we're going to walk through, we're going to get through the 4 different measures and the data that comes from it. And then we're going to walk through sort of the suite of tools that the utility has at their disposal versus the suite of tools or the single suite of tool that they choose to use, which, spoiler alert, is just pipe replacement. So the third measure that they use to determine system safety. So again, this is going back to, is all this spending, is DIMP working? Is the system getting safer? The third one they look at is gas leaks repaired. This was not actually chosen by DIMP or for DIMP specifically. It was a carryover from some early 1970 reporting requirements. Justin going deep into the legal history on this one. But this is, and has been since my time doing the consulting work, one of the most frustrating metrics and measures that's used by the utilities in a lot of their proceedings. They'll put some sort of slide that looks at leaks on their screen and show it going down and say, this is really wonderful. But it just shows leaks repaired. Again, there's not a leaks discovered metric there. So they can go out and they can repair a bunch of leaks in a year, or not many leaks in a year, but without that, without the numerator and the denominator, you have a difficult time in determining whether there's effectiveness there. Justin, I see you physically raising your hand.
Yes, I gave up on the digital version. Just a very quick addition. The nature of the crafting, let's call it, of these performance metrics early on. You heard Mike, I think, say the word ultimate with reference to incidents. The idea was that incident counts would obviously become the ultimate metric that you could use to evaluate performance on a programmatic and operator level. The other metrics were adopted with the rationale that, look, at this point, and by that I mean a few months after implementation of a law passed in 1968, we just need data. We don't have data. We haven't ever regulated distribution level safety before. Let's just take whatever we're going to get, treat it as useful but temporary. And it just kind of ignored the fact that it was temporary. And it has since endured, and there hasn't really been a thoroughgoing re-examination of what performance metrics would make sense and whether or not the ones adopted made sense in any context other than that initial, let's just scrape whatever is available to us problem solving moment.
The issues with application on this are really, so we mentioned the counting challenge to it, but it's also a huge detection challenge. So underground leaks are almost impossible to measure on a magnitude basis based off of soil type, moisture, surface conditions, the surveying method. In fact, you all are home to the best research on this over at METEC. I believe that's at Colorado State, which has written a number of papers on just how nearly impossible it is to quantify the size of a leak from a surface level detection, which makes it even more difficult considering the fact there is no consistent grading criteria, detection thresholds, counting protocols, measurement requirements, all of which would at least improve this information. And then we find that the LDCs themselves, actually their own, a study from GTI, Gas Technology Institute, found that operators misclassified pipe type and material in more than half the cases when they were dealing with leak data reported to PHMSA. So there's a lot of issues with the application. It's far too unreliable to support comparisons across operators or draw any sort of conclusions around effectiveness. Starting from the numerator denominator problem, but also getting way into reporting standards. PHMSA publishes a 20-year leak trend. They respond to legislative requests about it. Operators and AGA, I have been involved in a Colorado rate case. I think I've been involved in, certainly not in the past few years, but I have seen many times in other states the operators put up charts again on those declining leak counts or leaks based off of this data. And a third thing I'm going to point out, we'll spend about 2 minutes on it, is emissions reduction claims, just because that tends to be the backup after they talk about safety. They say, well, in addition to safety, when we are mitigating these leaks, and especially when they say mitigating leaks by pipe replacement, we are significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a term that you'll hear about on the surface level. Of course, it is true. Leaking gas, really bad. Leaking methane, really bad for the planet. But I want to talk through this chart here and talk about how they come up with this line about emissions reduced. And so what happened is, if you go back to the early 90s, a study was put together by the precursor to the Gas Technology Institute, along with the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and they did this very small scale study on pipe material and the prevalence of leaks and the magnitudes of leaks. So saying basically, we believe cast iron leaks at X frequency and every cast iron pipe leaks at Y magnitude. And it was a very small study that has subsequently been, there have been a number of studies since then that have shown the deficiency in that original study. Yet we have this type of chart, which basically says, we assume that a generic mile of cast iron pipe removed and replaced with a generic mile of new plastic pipe will have reduced that X times Y, that frequency and magnitude of leaks from cast iron pipes, to give us this emissions reduction. So there's no actual measurement here of methane that has been reduced from the atmosphere or from the gas system. This is a sort of simple arithmetic. And of course, those subsequent studies that I mentioned have shown that they vastly overcounted. They're actually vastly undercounting total emissions from the gas system, but they're overcounting the delta between cast iron, steel, and plastic when it comes to the likelihood and frequency of leaks, making charts like this wildly inaccurate. So we're going to have a separate small little white paper on that will get your way. There's a blog post that's been prepared on it. And we're happy to discuss that further. Really just goes back to the fact data's flat as it is. I really don't want to give it much more than it deserves. It really does not deserve. It deserves a ton of scrutiny and absolutely zero validity when it comes to a safety measure at the moment. I'm not sure Justin, as general counsel, would agree with zero validity. Maybe I should say minor amounts of validity.
Yeah, the small point I would make, I guess, on this is there is not a lot of solid research connecting the leak repair or eliminated rate to safety outcomes in a rigorous way. These are referred to in ways that often presume a logical relationship, presume causal arrows in that logical relationship, but not for lack of searching. We have not found any work that has done a really good job of actually sketching the contours and explaining the mechanisms of how these two things relate.
Part of that is you cannot pinpoint a leak from a surface level measurement. You cannot pinpoint a gas main leak from a surface level measurement. And so technologies is a great place for technology, for leak detection, both surface level and subsurface level, in situ leak detection. All of these things would be phenomenal for gas safety. They are not things that the industry is investing heavily in. We'll come back to that a little bit later. The last performance measure was that of higher risk materials. So there is, I think it was mentioned, someone mentioned in the chat, is it a good thing that Colorado has replaced its cast iron pipe? On net, is it a good thing? I would say it really depends on how much was spent. Is it true that a brand new plastic pipe compared to an older cast iron pipe is less likely to cause an incident? The answer is yes, but not by that much. So some of the challenges with cast iron, there are also variations in terms of the challenges with cast iron. For some of the larger diameter, older cast iron, anywhere, especially the older it is, sort of pre-World War II, if it was built to handle coal manufactured gas, then that coal manufactured gas was much more moist, and they used bell and spigot joints. So basically, the pipes were held together by jute, so a combination of straw and some mud type characteristics. And so as they switched to natural gas, much drier than manufactured gas, those joints could dry out, and that caused a lot of leaking at the joints. Small diameter cast iron in colder environments is more subject to frost thaw heaves and can crack. It's more of a cracking than a corrosion concern. And so really small diameter, 2 inches, maybe 4 inches or less, more subjective to a lot of those frost thaw heaves. And it also just so happens that a lot of that cast iron is in places of the country where there is a lot of construction, and so that data can be potentially skewed by the fact that the places of the country that receive the most subsurface construction are the ones that happen to have a lot of the cast iron pipes. There's been a number of research over the years, so even in the DIMP rule preamble, that older pipe, if properly maintained, operates quite safely. One big reason for that is if you think about some of those old cast iron mains, 24-inch, 36-inch mains, that cast iron is really thick. So you're doing okay with the larger diameter cast iron. This was an administrative addition to performance measures. And so I just saw Justin raise your hand on that. Do you want to talk through that?
No, one quick flag, and I ought to have caught this on the slide. It's a little tricky. So that sentence or clause, I guess, cast iron's just 1% of mains, but involved in 8% of incidents. That is actually not as straightforward a data point as you would think. That's straight from PHMSA's website. But what that obscures is the fact that the 1% is the current inventory of cast iron. The 8% comes from 20 years of data. So back in 2005, I think it was 3.5%. And so 8% is actually spread over a somewhat different ratio of cast iron to the rest of the population of pipes.
Thank you for that clarification. We'll make that update. PHMSA publishes this annually. This was it is a request from Congress that they publish the data on cast iron and bare steel. They treat these materials as categorically dangerous, and that has then been subsequently adopted by many operators and state regulators that have treated it as a measurement of safety progress. And so back to that Justin's point, I think this is why we had highlighted that in green to talk through the 1 versus 8% issue. But this tends to get used frequently in states as a measure of safety, which would be the reduction in this material. But there's quite a few buts to that. So the system is actually the next slide after this is going to talk a little bit about the miles replaced per dollar spend, which has declined significantly. There's this figure up here that we have of 408 to 1. And so if you were to look at Germany, Japan, and Brazil, there's been a significant amount of repair and relining efforts. So you can use a cured in place liner, a slip liner in some of these old pipes, especially if you're concerned about corrosion. And that has just not been widely adopted in the United States compared to how it has been internationally. And then plastic is a major growing blind spot. As more of the system is plastic, the fact is PHMSA does not require operators to document the subtypes of plastic that are higher risk. And so when they just say plastic, lumping it all in one place can cause a huge challenge. And now we're moving on to that category in a number of states. I'm sure you're seeing it in Colorado. I know we're seeing it in states across the country where this notion of, oh, we replaced this leak-prone pipe. Well, now we've determined there's another subset of plastic, another subset that is riskier than new plastic. And common sense should dictate that, yes, probably the latest and greatest new plastic pipe will have some features that'll make it stronger than whatever has been in the ground for 40 years, but that alone does not necessitate replacement. And so do we have, maybe I don't have the chart on it's in the spending section of our analysis that goes through the miles per year. Summarizing on the safety, yes, the system is safer. That safety improvements continued well before DIMP and call to action. There has been no formal step change since 2011. We're not really addressing the foundational cause, or limited amount of money is going into excavation damage as is compared to pipeline replacement programs. And the replacement programs, they track activity, they don't track safety outcomes. And so just by tracking replacement, it's not tying directly to the safety outcomes. And as you can, to get into the cause of the data, you see that a lot of those older pipes and metal pipes represent only a very tiny subset of what is actually causing risk on the systems. So we have some serious concerns with a spending program that has largely been centered around pipeline replacement. I think this is, I showed this slide twice because I think this is the probably the most important slide from this whole presentation and this whole 150 plus page analysis. Is if you think about all the things that can be done to improve system safety, we are pretty much just focused on pipeline replacement. And there is a whole host of other opportunities, both activities, discrete activities, as well as control programs to improve system safety. And when we are talking about $250 billion spent on gas distribution CapEx, and the majority of that going to pipeline replacement, that is our core concern for both state regulators as well as federal Congress and PHMSA, the subsequent actions associated with this program. So we have seen the spending growth, but it's not coming from system growth. We're seeing massive CapEx increases, and we're seeing, actually, it's almost 4x increase in distribution capital spend now. And it's going almost entirely to pipeline replacement. Here you can see it vis-a-vis excavation damage and prevention programs. So they have seen, since their creation, 811 programs, they have gotten investment. If you go back to that table of incident causes and you think about how much is from excavation damage versus corrosion or material failures, those material failures are at the very bottom of the list and the excavation damage is at the top, yet it's running 5x, 4x, 5x the amount of spending going towards pipeline replacement versus excavation damage and prevention. And that leak detection and repair. And so, especially in areas where we're seeing flat, declining residential demand on the gas system in states that have ambitious climate goals, as we see increased competition from electric heat pumps, thinking about how do we operate a safe gas system for the next 5, 10, 20 years, as opposed to a perpetual gas system, those arguments for repair tend to make a lot more sense as well. This is the chart I was looking for earlier. This is capital productivity. So we were replacing a mile for about $300,000 between 2005 and 2008. These are some national averages. This is highly localized. The actual data is highly localized. You'll see, of course, Brooklyn is 12 million, 15 million a mile, whereas you might have some more rural Colorado that could be around 800,000-900,000 a mile. But what we have seen is not an increase in the miles replaced. We have seen an increase in the cost per mile from pipe replacement. Now, it's hard to attribute that exactly to one thing, but what we are starting to see around the country, I'd love to point to Illinois as an example. I mentioned earlier, 43 states had those infrastructure trackers. Well, Illinois is no longer one of them. Theirs expired about 2 years ago. And just last year, an extensive rate case for Nicor and Ameren's gas utilities. They did a real deep dive into their gas CapEx and found a number of disallowances. Same thing with Peoples Gas. I think they just announced the settlement a few days ago for spending by Peoples Gas, which they found was not prudent. And so the value of having formal rate cases, giving your staff the time, bringing the staff in from the gas safety division. So it's not just your rates analysts who are looking at this, but using the full power of the staff to take a look into this so that we don't end up with charts like this one. Again, I return to this slide because it's the one area that we think consumer advocates, commissions can be most helpful with, which is looking at all those other things that aren't highlighted. And you'll have to forgive me, I think that's yellow, but I'm colorblind. So I'm waiting to call on you, Joe, just because this is the last slide, and then I'm going to go to Q&A. But do you want to talk about this chart?
Yeah, just quickly, because I might have understood or heard something wrong. So are you saying with the People's example for that we're seeing the cost per mile increase under safety or non-safety programs? I guess I'm not exactly sure. What you're seeing as a driver of the difference or the increase in cost per mile. Sorry.
Yeah, the implication is that infrastructure tracker program, so accelerated cost recovery mechanisms, shorten the time window in which the PUC and the consumer advocate has in order to evaluate the proposed replacement program. So they also create definitions, and just a lot of them blanket say, hey, replacement of this type of, a lot of it's in the definitions of what is determined prudent and what isn't determined prudent. But the availability or the ability of a commission and a consumer advocate to really ask detailed questions of, is this actually making the system safer? How did you establish these risk rankings? Please walk me through this risk methodology. That whole process is very difficult when you're doing it under a shortened time window. And so I'm saying we can't point an exact figure we can say there's a statistically significant increase in cost per mile post DIMP and call to action introduction. I can't say exactly why that is, but I am pointing to a really good example of a state where, since they've gotten rid of that accelerated cost recovery mechanism, they had a more exhaustive and thorough rate case. Their ability to find out that information. I'm not saying, of course, it certainly can be done when your state has an accelerated cost recovery mechanism, and not all are equal. Some states give you still 6 months, which is better than some states, which I think give 90 days or fewer. Jamie, who I believe has joined the call, might be able to talk a little bit more about that one. What we didn't get into today, and maybe that'll be the second one of these conversations, is we're going to talk about the paper does go through those risk models, and that's really how do they justify all that expenditure? How do they bring that and get the stamp of approval from the commissioner to say these are prudent expenditures? They put a lot of numbers out there, and we dive through those methodologies. The hint for you all is it's really all in the DIMP and asking questions about the DIMP. And of course, we include a giant set of recommendations for ways that this system can be improved. So I'm going to turn it over to questions. We have Dory and Justin here. I think maybe this is the slide I'll leave it on for questions. Folks have want to talk through anything on gas system safety. I'm sure the first question, or I hope the first question, is when can we read the full paper? And the answer is at the end of the month. We will send you a copy. So that's the first answer.
Yeah, Michael, quick question for you. Coming, as you know, for me from an accounting rate making standpoint, in the early days when we would work with our gas safety people, when we had more, say, municipals or other utilities in the state that it would come in for a rate case, we'd be looking at what they call the lost and unaccountable gas factor, basically what's leaking from the system, and that sometimes could be an indication that maybe there was a problem. I don't know if there's been, and it's a cost of doing business if it's reasonable. So you and I, if we're gas ratepayers, will pay for that leakage. I don't know if there's been any kind of analysis looked at that with all this improvements and so forth. Has that reduced that loss and unaccountable factor, or is that just kind of out there on its own?
I'm going to let Dory answer that one. Go ahead.
So, Bill, I've been watching this, and I've actually seen with a number of jurisdictions that LAUF has been going up in the last few years, and I don't get what's governing the trends at all. Plastic. If your system is 100% plastic is a much more permeable material than metal. So stuff, CH4 kind of just migrates out of plastic in a way that's not true of metals. So I think that's so it's not necessarily called a leak, it's just the permeation of the material itself. I think that's probably a factor. I mean, from an advocate point of view, I can't remember now, but there is one state now that has filed legislation to, basically have gas companies cover the costs of the lost and unaccounted for gas and not customers. So I think that's an interesting take. But in general, lost and unaccounted for gas is not purely a function of leaks. It's also has to do with just measurement errors. And essentially it's measuring what the quantity of gas that went into the system and then what is being billed out for at the end. And there's discrepancy. So there's a lot of factors in there and a lot of questions.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Sure.
Yeah, we can dig up. I know there's been a handful of papers looking at trying to measure lost and unaccounted for gas on a story you mentioned where it's happening. Is it happening at the meter set versus from the main, and the difficulty in determining where it's being lost from as well. So I know.
Yeah, I just didn't know if there was any research that these utilities are saying, see, now we've replaced this, we've been able to reduce this cost of doing business. And I agree, we had a decades ago a problem with the high propane system at Crested Butte that literally leaked and blew up from a contractor cut. And as there was a poor modem, it was all kinds of factors that was skewing their loss and unaccountable gas numbers. So I appreciate that. But yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you on an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? I'm also happy to, well, I'll give a shout out. I think there's a good question in the chat from Corey about relining versus replacement. So there's, and Dory's on it. There's a great FAQ on one of the relining company's website. They worked with NiSearch and Cornell. In fact, they've also worked closely with Brad Wham, who was at UC Boulder, but is now at Nevada on testing of liners rated for now 100 years and can actually create a really nice composite material. You get the structural strength of the metal pipe on the outside, plus the flexibility of a more like a plastic pipe on the inside of that. And this was it's a key component of an active proceeding. I know I just saw the filings in the People's Gas current rate case that the Illinois PERG and the Attorney General filed quite a bit on the potential savings should Peoples were to have gone with a relining option. So happy to talk more about that. Corey, you got your hand raised.
There's also an excellent Substack piece on.
Yes, there's also yes,
which I put in the chat.
Yep, I've already downloaded that. Thank you so much. I know we're running long here. I just very quickly, we have just gone through our second GIP, gas infrastructure plan process for our largest gas utility, which is Xcel Energy, also known as Public Service Company. And one thing that's really driving the costs is the MAOP recertification, MAOP being maximum allowable operating pressure. And I know PHMSA provides options, some which are cheaper than others, but it seems that the default for the utility is to go for replacement, which you get rid of mostly depreciated old pipe, and then you get to put brand new spanking new pipe in for rate base. I mean, do you have any comments on the MAOP recertification and what you're seeing out there?
I don't know if Dory has anything on it. MAOP hasn't been a core component of the pipeline safety research for this paper because it's not listed by PHMSA in this, but I do know Rod Walker and Associates did that testimony. I again come back to Illinois as a great example where they brought in RWA. I'm happy to, we're not affiliated with any specific consulting company, which is nice. We don't participate in any proceedings directly, so that allows us to provide advice to consumer advocates as well as to the commissions directly. But I can certainly recommend a handful of great consultants in this space. And I've seen some excellent testimony from the folks at Rod Walker and Associates, which has a number of former gas engineers and gas executives on staff there doing work for the, I don't know if it was Cub or AG out there in Illinois where they did that testimony. And it led to, I think it was like $100 million plus disallowance, pushing back on those MAOP decisions.
Yeah. Well, Xcel is estimating they're going to spend just over $1 billion. That's what the B over the next 10 years on the MAOP. So, because you have 10 years until 2035.
I'm going to find that testimony and send it to you, Corey.
That'd be super. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Bill, you're the boss.
Yes, well, unless anybody has any other questions, we'll let you go. And thank you for your time. I'm sure we will probably see you again. And if I can ever do anything for you, feel free to reach out to me as well. So,
Well,
okay.
thank you all.
Thank
Really
you all.
appreciate the time. Thank you for doing what you do.
You bet.
Thanks, everybody.
Good to meet you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. It was
Yeah.
great.
Joseph, what I suggest is maybe we let Corey give his presentation. That way we can turn him loose to his work, and then we can take care of the minutes and all that stuff after Corey's done. So
Sounds great to me.
yeah, I know Corey's itching to get back to work. So
Well, so I mentioned Excel, also known as Public Service Company. We have concurrent or contemporaneous rate cases, the electric rate case and the gas rate case. And collectively, what they asked for in direct for those two divisions is over $500 million in rate increases. $500 million. It's just incredible money. But anyway, I'm here to talk about the electric rate case, and I talked to you all, I think, back in January on this, and I gave you background that I thought it was the largest single test year rate case we've ever seen for public service, therefore the largest in Colorado history. And when I say single test year, public service has filed multi-year plans, which consist of 2 or more forecast test years, future test years. And even those dollar amounts did not add up to what they're asking for in this case, which is $356 million. So the good news is that UCA, in our protest and then again our intervention, asked the commission for public service to update its data that it filed back in November, because they use kind of a half historical data, half forecasted data. And when they filed this updated revenue requirement, this was in March of this year. It decreased their request or ask from about 356 million to, well, it knocked off $24 million from their revenue ask. So that was a good thing, and I'm glad that we asked for it in our intervention and protest, and I'm glad the commission listened to us. As always, primary issues: return on equity, equity debt structure, appropriate test year. We're going to have a historic test year, so that one's off the table now. And the use of whether this is going to get like inside baseball here, but whether we use a year-end rate base method on plant, or we use what we call a 13-month average. UCA almost always goes for the 13-month average for many reasons. And also it actually increases regulatory lag, which we see as a good thing, because it creates incentive for the commission to be, or excuse me, the utilities to be more efficient. But just that one change in rate-based methodology is worth about $60 million in revenue requirement. A huge amount, second only to what the return on equity, weighted average cost of capital will be, capital structure. Procedural posture. I already mentioned that in March, Public Service filed these new revenue requirements. So on April 28th, UCA and its 7 witnesses filed our answer testimony along with several interveners. And in about 2 weeks, we have, less than 2 weeks. Next Wednesday on May 20th, we have Public Service filing their rebuttal testimony and any cross answer testimony out there. First day of the evidentiary hearing is June 11th. So we're trying to knock it down. Our revenue requirement recommendation was 138 million, meaning they get a base rate increase of 138 million. Staff was higher than us by about 30 million or so. And so you might be asking yourself, well, what kind of job are you doing, UCA, if you're still allowing 138 million? And I will say there's a lot of plant investment that they're going to recover on. Their last rate case was 2022 using a 2021 plant or test year. So they're recovering new plant from 2022, 23, 24, 25. That's 4 years, and that's a lot of investment. So that's why, yeah, we did the best we can, but it's still going to be a base rate increase. So I gave you a real quick overview. I see where Amy has her hand raised. So go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, and Corey, thank you for that. And maybe this goes to both you and Bill and your expertise in dealing with Excel. Um, I saw their investor a report on their the call they had with their investors at the end of March.
Earnings call presentation.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. That's it. And they said essentially $17 trillion or trillion, I'm sorry. What's a billion or a trillion among friends? 17 billion dollar. They anticipate an increase in their asset base, which is currently, I think, what is it, just over 13 billion. They're looking, they were saying that they were, I mean, honestly, they seemed like they were giddy about it. But $17 billion over 4.5 years between now and 2030. I don't know how anyone, I don't know the answer to that. Like, and I'm curious if you guys saw that, one, and two, how do we handle that? Nobody can afford that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say a few things, and then I'll probably toss it over to Joe, our new director. So one thing, Amy, that the commission required a public service Excel to file is what they called a long-term rate model. Showing the commission says we want to know what's going to be the impact on base rates going forward because of this incredible increase of adding new plant. And when you said they seemed giddy about it, I mean, that's the name of the game for these utilities is they don't earn off O&M or depreciation expense. They earn off what an accountant like me would think of as their assets, their rate base. And so, yeah, their analysts that follow them, they love to hear that stuff. And so it's all about putting new infrastructure in. And what are we going to do about it going forward? Joe, do you want to weigh in on that?
Put me on the spot on that one.
Hang on a second. I did say I was going to be tossing it over to you. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the ultimate, kind of crux of the affordability, issue we've been trying to raise at the commission and with the public more generally. The projected future loads due to transportation electrification, building electrification, and data centers are huge, and those drive this capital spend, and so and primarily the data center forecast, and so I think there's multi-pronged. One is the core of what Corey's presenting today is making arguments about the returns that the company will earn on these, and then we've been bringing forward the idea that if you're going to spend at this type of magnitude, that it's better to use debt than equity to fund these type of investments. Thinking about better pacing of these investments, I think, is another thing that will come up. And then the data center issue is live on the table too, and that'll be coming. We'll bring that forward to discuss with folks. But we've been advocating, and we will advocate for really cost segregation and very specific cost allocation for data center loads. And so it's just kind of informally been said that the utility will charge and the data centers or large loads will pay for the needed investments in generation and transmission and other things to support their growth. Those are all informal at this point, and so we will have to do a good job of locking in this cost segregation, and that's one way to mitigate the impact on residential customers. But all that to be said is, Amy, I think even when we do those things and we're aggressive on those things and we win on them, that customers in public services territory are still going to be facing doubling of bills, possibly tripling of bills by a decade from now. And I think that that's a number that it's been out in the public, but I still think there's some denial about that impact.
I guess my thought, a couple of things, and I think Chairman Blank has been, I mean, he's been signaling it too, right? Like I think he has said a couple of times, very worried about the impact on ratepayers. And okay, I guess what I'm concerned about, I don't think the public knows what's coming. And I feel a sense of responsibility that they need to know, and they don't know, because once the bills hit them, then they'll be looking at people like us, the Public Utilities Commission. What happened? Why did you allow that? And the other thing is, if data center loads don't materialize, I mean, if those don't materialize, we're in a far worse position. So I'm just super concerned about, when I saw that, that we have a public that may have heard it, but doesn't know exactly what may be coming. So thanks.
I think we share that concern.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Amy, I'm under contract and I do some advisory work for the New Mexico Commission, and they're facing this very same thing with SPS. It's a subsidiary of XL that I was looking at this morning. So, I mean, it's something that's out there, and I think the current increase XL is asking after some rate mitigation to soften it is 30% increase for residential down there in El Paso Electric's at about the same. And so everyone's concerned about the data centers. Does our typical allocation of costs between residential and industrials and all that still fit given all the changes? So this is something that's really hitting across the country as well. So I share the concerns too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead. I'm done.
Is there any thought, or I know the data center bill stalled, and I didn't think either one of them was great, but that's neither here nor there. New Hampshire is allowing totally islanded grids that they build their own, they manage it, they can work with the utility, they can work with whomever, and they have totally their own grid, and there's no crossover because it's their own grid, right? They pay for the generation, they pay for the O&M, they pay for all of it. And if, like I said, they can hire another contractor, they can hire a utility, and I know that the utilities are saying we have a guaranteed territory, we don't want anyone encroaching upon it. Fine, you want to work directly with a data center and provide that, fine, but letting them do their own thing and keeping them off of our grid, so residential and small business and even existing large load customers don't have to pay for that possible large load, but it may or may not materialize. And is there any consideration of that? I've seen New Hampshire do it. I've seen the bill in a couple of other states as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything on that. I mean, you stated, I think that we're not going to see large load legislation this year, public service has filed their tariff. And so we will at least know what we're doing for public services territory in the next, 6-8 months. But public service has not proposed, as you wouldn't be surprised, has not proposed that type of approach as an alternative for.
Yeah, I suspect not. I suspect not. Although I did hear there is a possibility of a special session to address data centers. I don't know if that's true or not.
Interesting.
All kinds of rumors flying, but ratepayers can ill afford any kind of large load build out that ends up being stranded because the data centers don't materialize. I don't know. So anyway, hey, thanks for what you guys are doing and appreciated today's presentation.
Corey, do you have anything else to add or?
Well, I was remiss. I skipped over one of the major issues in this case, and that's what's going on down in Pueblo at Comanche 2 and Comanche 3. And we do happen to have Leslie Henry Sermos on the phone. And Leslie, could you give us just a very brief summary of what's going on there for the group?
Yeah, hi. I was mentioning to Corey that I wanted to keep the Comanche discussion maybe either for another meeting or just briefly discussed here because it tends to gravitate towards hijacking the discussion because it is such an important issue. So within the cost recovery proposed in this rate case, a large portion of the capital that the company is expecting or hoping to recover is that of Comanche 3. So within that, 3 interveners, UCA, CEC, and staff have proposed potentially removing Comanche 3 from rate base and doing an alternative form of cost recovery for this unit, since this unit has been inundated since the beginning with issues about availability. So there's 2 alternatives proposed, one by staff and one by CEC, to do an availability-based cost recovery, meaning that if the unit is generating, then the company is compensated for that based on that capacity that is available. Also, in consideration that the unit, after the repair, after this major outage that it is experiencing, will have a decreased capacity. So within that, our position was that the commission needs to take a substantial in-depth look at what Comanche is and how it's been operating since the beginning of its generation time. We presented a strong record of all the outages, unplanned outages that this unit has had, and an analysis of somewhat what the cost to customers have been within that period of time, because we haven't been able to determine specifically what the replacement costs for this unit have been, because the company has been very obscure about trying to provide this information. So we provided an analysis based on the GATS reports that they've presented, and a historical analysis, a comparative analysis also, 2 other company-owned units, and a nationwide analysis with other similar units across the U.S. So we're hoping that the commission will take a serious look at what this is costing to customers, having a unit that has been so inefficient, and potentially decide to either adopt one of these 2 potential alternatives that staff and CEC are providing, or something else that they decide, but that recognizes that this unit is not providing the service to customers that they're expecting to recover.
I was just going to add, some of you may have remembered that we had this issue with Fort St. Vrain. Ron Benz brought it up when he was the consumer advocate, and there was actually a an adjustment. I think Warren Windley was the engineer for Colorado that, made some adjustments for that on the replacement power. And so you may know that or not, but that there's a prior commission ruling on that. So just an FYI.
Yeah, and within our ECAs, sorry, within our ECAs and PCCAs, we've also had adjustments done in two recent proceedings for the last 2 years, in which the company has made adjustments on those costs that they're trying to recover and replacement costs for that. But the information again that they provide is skewed, so they go with, there's not a specific base. They just go with what either the commission or staff recommends that could be somewhat an estimation of what those replacement costs are. But we haven't had a lot of information provided from the company to make a specific analysis. There's been an order to try to provide modeling of what those replacement costs have been within one of those proceedings and try to determine those costs. But again, it was specifically for that time in that time frame, right, of that year, but it does not replicate. The company does not continue to use that same modeling, Bill, that other companies use to determine those costs. So even in the last ECA, the order was to do replacement costs for their entire fleet, because their whole fleet is not generating at what they should be, at the level that they should be. So the estimation was an overall replacement cost, the average. But specifically for Comanche 3, there's continues to be a lot of information missing to fill in those blanks.
Well, not to drag this out, but just one thing the commission could always, or you could consider if you feel it's fruitful, would be put a recommendation in that the commission look at hiring an independent outside expert to come in and start to look at these type of things. But it's like I say, it's just a comment. You'd have to decide, Joe, whether you feel it's worth pursuing. But commission's done this in the past with even on resource planning, things like that, to get a third party to come in and look at this and see what you got. So, well, that's all that I have. Corey, do you have anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you for the input
Okay.
and the questions. I appreciate it.
Okay, and thank you all, Corey, Leslie, Scott, Dr. England, everybody else at the consumer office for all your hard work. Hector, let's see if we can come back to our initial thing of approve our May meeting agenda and April minutes. Do we still have enough people to do that?
We do not have a quorum today, Bill.
Okay, so we will put that on our agenda for the next time. Okay, and then new business miscellaneous updates. Joseph, do you have any? Okay.
No, nothing. I think we're probably ready to wrap up, Bill.
Okay, just a quick question. Do we have anybody's term expiring in the near future?
We do have a couple terms expiring, and it's my understanding that Hector and folks are working on that, and we're in process. We're still looking for representatives for CD5 and CD6. So that's kind of around Colorado Springs and Southeast Denver. So if folks have contacts or know people that are interested, we'd appreciate some feedback.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I asked on expiring terms, if we had people who weren't going to try to renew, then I wanted to thank them for their service on the board. So hopefully we will see them all reappointed shortly. So, well, if we don't have a quorum, I guess we can't take a motion to adjourn. But let's go ahead.
I think we'll just adjourn, Bill.
Let's just adjourn anyway. And Hector, our next meeting is July
13th.
Okay, so we will see you all then. And thank you for all being here today.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.